I started early with listening to aggressive and heavy music. I hung out with the older kids and was immediately exposed to Black Sabbath, Motley Crue, Scorpions, Accept, Judas Priest, oh, and of course Iron Maiden. My friend that looked exactly like Johnny from The Karate Kid put on the Number of the Beast record one night when I was sleeping over. He returned the album to the jacket and put it on the shelf right in front of me. That thing stared at me all night long. I literally didn't sleep at all night. That cover scared the hell out of me. But I loved the music, which also scared the hell out of me. I thought this was a pinnacle of music, and it was, for that style and for that time. It was a natural progression. Every time when I was younger or little, I would hear Van Halen or Def Leppard or Rat on the radio. I would crank it up, man. A couple years passed and I was in musical heaven bliss. Then my neighbor, who looked like Tom Cruise with long blonde hair, lent me a tape and just said, "You're really gonna dig this." And I was like, "Cool, thanks." Looking down at the cover, I got super excited. The colors reminded me of a cool autumn evening in a military cemetery. Metallica. That name sounds awesome. Master of Puppets? This is gonna blow my freaking doors off. I got it home, popped open the tape deck that had every metal band I could think of written all over it in marker, and turned it up all the way. I was white knuckle stoked, expecting the heaviest nuclear explosion, and what did I get? A dark, brooding Spanish guitar, which is not easy to play. These boys wanted us to know that they were not only masters of one style, but many. Then, a slow, deliberate build. Nothing sounded like this, and you could feel it coming. It was a storm, man. After the opening chords rang out and the song started to thrash and that main riff kicked in, I knew that music had evolved, and I was witnessing it in real time. At a talent show, a band called Rigor Mortis covered Seek and Destroy. I asked this girl who was a metal expert and also a good friend, and I said, "Who is this?" And she said, "It's Metallica. It's off their album Kill 'Em All." And I said, "Oh, wow, Metallica has a new album out." Even though I thought I was on the cutting edge, I was still 2 albums behind. Most people didn't know any of these albums yet. It led me to my leather jacket and tight jeans phase. Every cool heavy metal rocker went through that at the time. The heavy metal t-shirts every day at school. I was putting my flag in the ground. This is my music and these are my people. It led me to some amazing friendships, amazing parties, and experienced some of the greatest concerts and shows that most people would never get a chance to see. This stuff was cool before 95% of your school ever even heard of it. Spiked bracelets, bullet belts, and long hair. Oh, and high top white sneakers with tight white jeans. Yeah, that was pretty cool. This path led me to discover bands like Megadeth, who in heavy metal drama, there was no greater rivalry with them and Metallica. Megadeth went on to become my favorite band, but Metallica is also still my favorite band. But following close were other bands like Pantera, Exodus, who should be part of the Big Five, Slayer, Anthrax, Overkill, Death Angel, Nuclear Assault, Testament, another one of those bands that's criminally underrated and had been there pretty much since the beginning. Corrosion of Conformity, Sodom, Overkill, another OG band that's been around for a long time and highly underrated. Dark Angel, Voivod, Violence, and many, many more. I was there when a lot of these bands were in their infancy, and I was watching them grow. I couldn't get enough of it. I was buying tapes every week at the mall. I was borrowing tapes from my friends at school. Then that led me to discover some other genres of this style of music, subgenres, if you will. And there was one thing that I got really into was crossover, which is bands that both the punk and the metal kids love. And there were some really, really good ones like DRI, Suicidal Tendencies, Agnostic Front. There was Cro-Mags. There was so many. A lot of these bands were influenced by each other. Some of the metal bands would get more punk, and some of the hardcore bands would add solos and get more metal. It was an amazing time. There was also bands that I got into like Sepultura and Death that led Pestilence, that led more towards like the death metal, super heavy side of things. As I got a little older, I started going to more and more shows, some heavy metal shows, some hardcore shows. I started to get more involved and more interested in the scene. I would later go on to be in some of my own bands, highly influenced by the music that I had listened to when I was younger. One of the bands was like a fast, kind of old school hardcore, but with a real screamy singer that added a artsy element to it, almost emo with fast riffs and breakdowns. So that was interesting. One of my other bands was more like, actually, a lot of people said that they were reminded of Mastodon, but with Randy from Lamb of God singing. We definitely had a lot of different influences in our band at that time. I had a lot of more the heavier side of things, and some of our guitar players were influenced by some of the more noisecore bands like Norma Jean and All Else Failed and Zayo, bands like that. So it was cool to see all of our influences come together to make us what we were, and I had a lot of fun. Those are some of the best times of my life. I wouldn't change it for the world. As music evolved, of course, there started to be more and more bands, and that created more and more subgenres, like straight edge hardcore, with bands like Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, Earth Crisis, Minor Threat, and a lot more. There was also some other bands that popped up that were more of like a rapcore style. That's what we called it back then. It later would go on to be called nu metal. But at the time, there was bands like E-Town Concrete, Downset, Madball, and a couple others. Then you had your math rock bands like Dillinger Escape Plan, Converge, All Else Failed. And then there was always the beatdown style, the Bulldoze, Crown of Thorns, the New York hardcore bands. It was mostly started there, and some Philly bands as well. Then you had the emo side of things and bands like AFI. And I didn't really listen to emo, so AFI is the only one I can think of. And then you had the more noisy bands like Coalesce, Norma Jean, Zayo, and bands of that ilk. And I got really into hardcore, especially the straight edge hardcore, because at the time I didn't do any drugs, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. Probably for about 10 or 15 years, I was straight edge. And some of the bands that really inspired me, like I said, Youth of Today, Sick of It All, Judge, Minor Threat, Gorilla Biscuits, Earth Crisis. Those bands were super influential to me at that time. I would go see them anytime I could. And later on, after I got more involved with the scene, I started some podcasts and had some hardcore and some metal podcasts, and I've interviewed people from different bands, some amazing bands. I interviewed Davin from Eaten Alive. I interviewed Rob from Exodus. I interviewed Doyle. I interviewed Michael Graves and Max, of course, from Sepultura. I interviewed Max a couple times. And there's a ton of others. Oh, Joey Belladonna from Anthrax, who was amazing. I also interviewed Spike from DRI, and there's a ton. I'm not going to name all of them, but just to show the influence that music had on my life and where it led me, and some of the things that I was able to experience because of having those opportunities and because of the music that I got into when I was very young and the friendships that I made when I was very young and grew with those people. And we would go to shows, and we would go to shows in New York, New Jersey. We'd go to shows in Philly, Lancaster. There was York. There was a lot of clubs back then that would have hardcore shows, and there was pop-up shows in places like fire halls and convention halls as well. My bands would play in fire halls, and the pinnacle, though, was a club called the Chameleon. And I've actually played the Chameleon 2 times with 2 different bands, and just an amazing history at that club with some of the bands that have played there. I'm not going to go into all or even any of them, but some huge bands played that club, and it was an honor to be able to play there. And I got to play there twice. Jeremy Weiss from Corrupted Image Records would set up shows there on Sundays, and that's where I got my start in the straight edge hardcore scene, pretty much. Just a great time. Aside from podcasting, I would also later go on to host a internet metal radio show called The Toxic Waltz with Iris J. It was so fun. I would play metal for people who loved metal. I would take requests and fulfill them for people, It really made me feel like I had a connection with them and maybe even made their day, or at least made a couple minutes of their day. But yeah, music, especially aggressive music, has always been in my life. I remember back when I was very, very little, I was into Leonard Skinner, CCR, anything with a beat and a guitar that was driving. Then, as I got a little bit older, it was some of the other bands I've already mentioned that I would hear on the radio, like Van Halen, even bands like Duran Duran or Men at Work, anything that had a guitar and a driving beat. I always liked it. I definitely wouldn't be the person I am today, for better or for worse, without music, particularly metal and thrash. It's been a great run, and we're still right on track with this crazy train that keeps growing. Yeah, I'm not sure what my life would be like if not for music, particularly metal and later on thrash. I know I owe a lot to the genre, and I made a lot of great friends and met a lot of cool bands and got into shows that I never would have been in otherwise if not for them sneaking me in the back door. And I'll tell you, this type of music is something that when you hear it, you want to be a part of it. It makes you want to do something. It makes you want to do something positive. And that's what it's all about, right? Doing something positive with your time, finding something positive to keep you occupied, finding an outlet for all that energy that you have. And, if you think about it, I know there was some pretty big heavy hitter metal bands at one time when you look at Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and bands like that. But I have a feeling that metal would have fallen by the wayside if not for Metallica coming along. I think Metallica might have saved metal and in turn created a new genre, but at the same time also preserved that which came before it because they have a lot of respect for the other bands that came before them. I know they love Budgie, they love Diamond Head. They paid respect to the bands that were their influences. And that's a huge thing in this metal scene and thrash scene is understanding your history and knowing where you come from and knowing why this music is so great. Again, at one point, James Hetfield, I'm sure, was sitting in a room and heard Budgie, or I'm sure Lars, definitely when he heard the new wave of British heavy metal, he said, you know what? I got to be in a band. I can guarantee of that. And the same thing with Dave Mustaine, who was in Metallica for a bit. And I'm certain that when he heard these bands, he just picked up a guitar, taught himself how to play, and learned the styles of the bands that he looked up to. That's what it's all about. That's what's really cool is seeing the influences and seeing the bands that came before these bands and how they can add on to it and put their own twist on it. That's how the scene progresses. And that's what keeps us going. This dude right here introduced me to more metal and thrash bands that I could shake a stick at. Ricky Rackman. He was the host for Headbangers Ball, and that was a show that was on MTV, believe it or not. Yeah, I actually learned about some metal and thrash bands from MTV. They changed the time slots a couple times. I used to be on right after I got home from school, and then they started putting it on at like midnight. So it was harder to find, but I still found it. I would stay up all night long and watch all the new videos, waiting for the new world premiere. I still remember the first time I saw my favorite band and my favorite song. It was Megadeth, and their song was Holy Wars, and I was blown away. Man, that song captured everything that I was looking for, and I ran out and got that album the very next day. This was exciting time because you had to actually seek the music out. I had a lot of friends that were into this kind of music and they lent me a lot of tapes and things like that. But there's a lot of bands I would have never even discovered or ever even heard of. And probably some of my friends never would have heard of if not for Ricky Rackman and that show, Headbangers Ball. It was killer. All my friends watched it too. And we used to compare notes and then share our tapes. And it was an amazing time. Another thing that we used to keep track of what was going on were magazines. Again, we didn't have an internet. We couldn't look up what cool thrash bands should I listen to today. So we looked in the magazines. We watched Headbangers Ball. Probably the best magazine that I used to subscribe to was Metal Forces and also Metal Edge. These were some of the greatest magazines. Oh, and also Kerrang was a really good one. And you would look in there, and of course I would rip out the pages and put these guys all over my wall. I remember I had a Dave Mustaine poster that was inside of Metal Edge magazine. I had Doro Pesh. I had of course, a bunch of Metallica and James Hetfield. And it just inspired me every day just to look at these dudes, and it just made me happy. So I put, covered my wall with pictures from Metal Edge and Kerrang and Metal Forces magazines. And again, there was also Hit Parader, which was another one of my favorites as well. These were some of the only ways that we could find out what was going on in the scene. And I lived in the country, and I lived on the East Coast, so I wasn't as exposed to some of this stuff as early on as some other people on the other coast. But once I found out about it, man, I was in hook, line, and sinker. I try to do this from off the top of my head. You can probably hear me stammering at times and kind of forgetting what bands I was trying to talk about. But I did go back, and I wanted to list some of the bands that I was listening to back in the 80s, and I forgot to mention, or maybe I did mention them, but here's a list of the bands that really helped to shape me and mold me in the type of palette that I had when it comes to thrash. These are the bands that I was listening to early on, and these are the bands that I continued to listen to for years. I might have mentioned them throughout the video, but maybe not. If not, if you get a chance to listen to some of these, if you've never heard of them, check them out. This is just a list of thrash metal and doom bands that I was listening to. I'm going to do another video about some of the other music I was listening to in the 80s. Hope you had a great time. Thrash metal to the future.